Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Blaster Master Boy. In the last part we started off the game and now we're in the latter half or so, World 3, Period 3. I prefer to say World because Period 3 just feels awkwardly worded. I should note, by the way, this is around the point in the game you'll notice where the worlds of the game are very varied in length. Because, like, World 1 is just 2 levels, but World 3 I think is like 3 or 4, and that's where it tends to stay for most of the game. I think the longest a world gets in this game is 7 levels, counting a boss, I think. Maybe it's 6. And I do want to correct something on that note from last part. Last time I said that if you get a game over, you're sent back to the first stage in a world. That's technically true for the Japanese version. In this game, you always start from the level you actively died on. So the game's a little more generous than I thought it was. Admittedly, I only really tend to die in this game on boss fights anyway. There's a couple of other version differences in general to the game. For instance, the bomb actively does even more damage to you in the Japanese version, and it already does some pretty hefty damage here in the US version. The biggest change of note is the life preservers. They had their time active doubled. They're only active for about 17 seconds in the Japanese version, whereas here in Blaster Master Boy, and I assume the PAL version as well, it's doubled to like 34. I've also heard whispers that the European version of the game runs slower, and the music does sound slightly different, so there could be some truth to that. But any messing around I've done, it feels by and large identical. Because I know that was a whole thing with, like, console games back then, and I think it ran like that until into 7th gen, I want to say, consoles, where the more standard 50Hz televisions were only slowly being phased out and stuff over there. I can't imagine playing some games at European frame rates at that point, I'll tell you that much, like, Ocarina of Time getting, like, what is it, 12 frames a second on PAL? No thank you. The 20 is already kind of pushing my limits on that stuff nowadays. I used to not really care about frame rates and stuff, and to an extent, I'm like, hey, if the game plays well, it plays well. If anything, I think I brought this up on the channel before. There are some games I see run at higher frame rates than I'm used to, and it just looks alien and wrong, and I don't like it. And it's specifically like Majora's Mask on 3DS and any of the HD versions of Resident Evil 4 that do that to me, because I played those so much. Looking forward to that remake of 4, though. That'll probably be close to coming out by the time this gets uploaded. I'll get to the later Resident Evils at some point. Code Veronica took a lot out of me doing, and gotta get another version of Zero to play, is what it ultimately comes down to at this moment. This is also around the point in the game you're gonna start seeing the third type of temporary boost item along the lines of the Life Preserver and the lamp, which are some sandals. The sandals are a bit weird though in that you get them this early, but you don't really have a way to use them until later. Because what they're meant to do is let you stand on spikes, but I don't think there's any spikes in the stages until at least period 5? So it's a little strange in that regard. Also, all of the temporary items can technically be ignored in that regard, I should note. Like, you can walk through the dark, you can just damage boost through the spikes. The only case that's not really true is the life preservers, because if you are in the water for too long, you do just straight up sink. And that means you can walk over like 3, 4 tile wide rivers, but anything like this, you just need life preservers for. Mind you, I think more than anything, they give you more life preservers than you need. It's the lamps that can be really low supply if you're especially investigating every single staircase downwards. And now we're the level 3 armor, which makes us look like a blend of Master Chief and Samus. I like it. Now, last time I said that when you die, you get demoted in armor level, and that is true, but I want to talk about how that really works. And it can be seen very quickly on the pause screen there. On the bottom there, you saw the amount of boots I've collected, the amount of armor power-ups I've collected, and the amount of beam extenders I've picked up. When you die, each of those numbers is reduced by 1. So that means you can be demoted, but if you have an overflow, say you're at like 4 force armor upgrades, you can die at the max level and still be at the max level. I'm not sure exactly how that works when it comes to the boots and the beam extender, if only because I don't remember the exact number that gets maxed out at. But because of that, it is very easy to just have a high amount of stuff going on. I do believe if you get a game over, though, that it's completely wiped. With that said, time for the boss of period 3, this chameleon. We can't get to the chameleon itself, though, due to the wall, but we can certainly have it pick up our bombs with its tongue. If you get towards a wall, it's very easy to just get into a lock, where it just stays in one place, eats your bomb, fires projectiles that you moving out of the way makes it miss anyway. This is a very easy boss. With that said, it's probably also the last very easy boss in the game, because period 4 beyond starts to get a little ridiculous real quick. With that said, now we're moving on to period 4, which isn't going to be sticking around that long. Like I said, the game is a little inconsistent with the amount of levels a period has to begin with, yes, but also the game's levels are very inconsistent in length. And for some games, that's not a problem, as usually they do unique mechanics in levels to help make up for level lengths in some cases. But Blaster Master Boy's levels don't really tend to do too much that varies on its mechanics. It's usually like just more complicated layouts, or this one has a lot more rocks to get out of the way. So the inconsistent level lengths really tend to stand out, plus it helps they're not really paced in a way that's like, here's a couple of short levels after like 4 long ones. It's, here's an entire world of short levels that's done within 5 minutes. But at the same time, like, stuff like this can be brought about by, like, developer crunch, or sometimes just reaching what your mechanics can do within a certain scale. Because from memory, I think Robo Warrior, the prequel to this, is a more intense game. Like, I think you even have more limited bombs and your control's a bit more limited. But I think it also does more interesting things mechanically. Like, if memory serves about the original Robo Warrior, and I'll probably get to it on LP at some point, like, there's some levels that just horizontally loop forever until you find a specific item within the rocks to stop it, and Blaster Master Boy never does anything like that. Which in some ways is a missed opportunity, because the Game Boy was capable of a lot of things when it came to games of about this relative scale. It's when you started to get ambitious and large with RPGs that things could get a little spotty prior to the Game Boy Color. And even then, a lot of the Game Boy Color exclusive games held together by about as much duct tape as the original Pokemon generation was to begin with, if you started looking around in the corners. The Oracle duology for Zelda is especially guilty of that. With that said, welcome to the first Darkness level of the game. You need to use lamps to see anything here, and a slightly annoying thing as well, if you're in one of these levels and you need to go into a sub-area, those sub-areas require a separate lamp to be used, because the transition from the main map to a sub-map removes whichever lamp you're using. There aren't too many levels like this in the game. I want to say there's at most 4 or 5, if even. But their layouts are maze-like enough that you're probably going to want to just save as many lamps as you can for these levels. You can use your gun to find your way around slightly, like I mentioned before, because the bullet disappears on impact with a wall, but that only goes so far. Be careful with these stages, they can be rough. Enemies spawn in when you literally can't even see them. And this is around the point where we start to see the enemies that can also use bombs for their own effect, so be careful. Not helping things is it's followed up by what could be theoretically the hardest boss in the game, this dragon. The dragon works like Snake, the classic game, in that it slowly moves its way around the field, taking up every space as efficiently as possible. But every certain amount of hits, it does reset and starts moving under a different pattern. These patterns get more complex, and it also moves faster. And touching this thing hurts. So you really gotta be careful, figure out which way it's trying to go first, and try to predict that as best you can. You can take a shot here just by knocking into it to knock it back and figure out where it's going from there, but that can only go so far. I'd say the only bosses harder than this in the game, period, are either the final boss because of pure damage potential, and I forget which period it's the boss of, but one that looks a bit like a Venus fly, not a Venus flytrap, an antlion is the comparison I'm trying to make here. It bears repeating, the bosses are the worst part of this game starting from boss 4 beyond. This is the worst one, but that doesn't mean the ones that follow it are easy by any means. Well, maybe the second to last boss fight is a little lazy. What makes some of the bosses easier than others, admittedly, is just the size of their hitbox relative to the size of their body, because sometimes it's either very easy to hit some of the bosses, or they're just so big hitting them isn't a problem. Period 5 is a bit of a weird one from memory, because it's relatively closed in compared to a lot of the other periods throughout the game. You're just gonna have a lot of small hallways, and we also get some weird teleporting enemies here that very often like to just teleport into your bomb's range. I think the way they're meant to work is that they can teleport across one-tile gaps, particularly through walls. But especially if you're moving fast enough, that doesn't really get a chance to be relevant. This is the point in the game, I'd say, where you can start to probably use the directional bombs, especially, and not really feel much consequence. I would save particularly the, I think it was the Hyper Bombs was the name of it, or was it the, I can't remember which one it is. The one that just goes in a straight line from where you placed it, because one of the upcoming boss fights is made a lot easier by having some of those around. But like the cross bombs, not much point to having those around anymore. And the super bombs, or whatever, the big ones, can be used to clear out big fields of rocks if you really need to. Anytime you see a suspiciously single-placed panel, it probably is a pathway to a secret passage. And these are still overall worth going for. Honestly, these restore point rooms like this that are hidden all over the place would make more sense to me overall if they had rarer items more often, like the force power-ups or one-ups. And they have a couple of those, especially probably in rooms I'm completely missing and don't know about the locations of. But at least in the ones that are, like, easy to find, you're not going to find a lot of those. And to an extent, it makes it feel like they would make more sense to have placed all over the place. If you lost more than just an upgrade level piece, if you die, if you also lost some amount of, like, your bomb ammunition or your temporary power-ups, death would feel like it's more of a threat because of that, I guess. But at the same time, losing the lamps would be just a pain in the ass beyond belief, so maybe I should be grateful that kindness is there. To an extent, sometimes I play games like this and think, this is weirdly kind. Why is it being kind to me? Because past a certain point, I play games and just expect cruelty. Not because they're outright malicious, just because they don't know better, in a lot of games cases. Trust me, it's easy to spot a malicious game if you played enough games like it. Also, this is one of the weird cases of level design in the game. We got this little sub-area here. And you need to go through it and leave it to grab the key here. That placement never really made sense to me. I always felt like they should have swapped where the key and sub-area was there. But, oh well. With that said, they gave us a lamp just there and right there for a reason. We're coming up on the second darkness stage, and from memory, I want to say 5.2 is the most maze-like of them all. Mind you, something that I think most of the later darkness levels in the game do is they like to place some water in them that you actively need to cross in some instances, so you need to make sure you're using quite a few of the limited items along the way. Also, this enemy variety sucks. It's just slime that doesn't hurt you and it slows you down, which doesn't actively harm you, but if you're running low on lamps, it's real rough. But that enemy type we can also see in this level here that's kind of bouncing back and forth. There's one right there, actually. They're some of the only enemies that have set spawn locations because they're meant to sort of be like Gordos from Kirby, in that they move between parts of the level design and act as hazards. You can kill them, unlike Gordos from Kirby, but they are meant to be sort of just a trap more so than an enemy. I forget, is 5.3 level or is it the boss? No, this is a level. And it's one of the more linear levels in the game, too. We're just going back and forth up small areas like this. Thinking about it, though, I guess the world sometimes being inconsistent in length, let alone the levels themselves being inconsistent in length, might make sense more for the Japanese version, given the whole game over there sends you back to the start of a period. Because they probably want to make shorter levels or worlds for bosses that are pains in the ass, so they wanted to maybe balance it out that way. The only thing about that doesn't make sense is that the longest world in the game has probably the easiest boss in the latter half, so that kind of falls apart. Not to mention, the previous world isn't exactly a short one, and this one's decently length, and the boss is kind of a pain in the ass. Not as much as the dragon, but I just think that's the worst boss in the game, period, barring maybe the final one. Something I do find interesting about the game, though, and I guess this goes to games in general, really. This game's soundtrack isn't too big. You're mostly hearing this one song for the game, barring when you're in the hidden rooms or the sub-areas or boss fights. But compared to some games that do this, it's not really annoying. And it's not like it worms its way into my ear as much, so it could just be a lesser song to begin with, so that's maybe why. But there is a certain balance to be said about how you place songs in the game and where you use them, and how that affects the playing experience. Like, a joke in my family for decades at this point, really, has just been randomly singing the main theme from the original Adventures of Lolo, and then everyone just slowly droning and joining in because we all played that game too much, and because it only has the one song, it gets annoying after a while. My point here is that I gotta give the points to the sound team for making good music that's not absurdly earwormy, that doesn't really get annoying, because I feel like that's a difficult balance to really hit. I'm not a composer, so I wouldn't know, but my friends who do music probably would say it is. I'm looking at you, Kenny. Alright, so boss for Period 5 is this antlion thing. This is what I believe I foreshadowed earlier. The more you damage it, the more its little spike tendrils grow, and I think they also get slightly faster. You need to just worm your way between them while staying as close to it as possible, and then place bombs. If you take this at, like, a slower movement type thing, like if you almost move to a certain beat in the music, it's not that bad, but if you try moving too fast, you're gonna walk into the next tendril. If you walk too slow, you're gonna get hit by the one behind you. So there is a balance to make here, plus the further you get in the fight, it moves faster, but then slows down as well to try and mess you up. This fight can be rough. It's not as rough as the dragon or the final boss, but I'd say this is definitely a contender for third most annoying boss fight overall. But it's down, and that means we're now on to Period 6. I recorded this footage 3 days ago, I think, and I don't remember anything about Period 6 off the top of my head right now. Alright, well, it's this one, so this is an interesting level that you can get one of the few easy-to-find one-ups in the game just by bombing these few blocks right there. Not that one-ups are super essential, because you can continue from any level here in the US version. They're a little more essential, I guess, in the Japanese version due to that. But even then, like, most of the base levels in this game aren't annoying enough to really be worried about having to replay. Compare that to, say you use the continue code in a Mario 1 playthrough. There are some levels in that game that are just annoying no matter what you do, like some of the fish bridge stages, some of the castles. Sometimes it's the threat of what you have to redo that makes death more punishing rather than just the death itself. Alright, so Period 6, though, does introduce the new hazard, the spikes. We need the shoe power, we picked up a couple of at this point in the game, to walk over these. I want to say the shoes last less time than life preservers do, but there's also less of them, period. And they're also much less of a threat than the water panels are. Because water, if you stand in it too long, you take damage and drown, essentially. But the spikes are interesting in that if you just stand still on them, you'll take the first point of damage, but you won't continuously be damaged. You'll only be damaged if you walk on another panel after your invincibility frames end. So if you want to, if there's like a very small sprint you need to make across them, you're probably only going to get hit once, so just take the dash. Obviously, if you're at a higher force level, that means you're probably going to take a little more damage to begin with, but you get healed between every stage in this game anyway, so it's not like the damage you take within an individual stage matters too much. It's more so when you die during a boss fight, or if you really lock yourself in a corner with your own bombs, that can become a problem. Which, you know, not for nothing, is, at least it's consistent. Whenever I used to play Bomberman on my own, or whenever I used to play with friends, like a couple sleepover nights, Scott and I used to play Bomberman on emulator, like Super Bomberman World on the Super Nintendo. Just do some multiplayer matches. I was the biggest threat to myself. So hey, consistency. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're gonna go finish off the game. See you guys then.